Ni howdy, y'all, and welcome to the penultimate episode of season 2. 3 years ago, we set off on a journey to try and make an episode about all the different categories of tea. And we didn't want to just do, this is oolong tea. We wanted to get really, really in-depth. So here we are, one long season and 3 years later, coming to the last of the categories that we have to cover. And this one is very near and dear to my heart and very important. This category is not really a category of tea at all. This category is the absence of a category. What we really don't want people to do, coming out of watching all of these episodes that we've made in season 2, detailing all of this information about the different categories of tea, the different types of tea, we don't want people to think, well, I know all about the types of tea now, so if I see a tea, then it's got to fit into one of these categories. And that's just not the way that works. It's not the way that works in China. That's not the way that creativity works, because tea is a living art. And if you think about it, there didn't used to be oolong tea. There didn't used to be red tea. At some point, there wasn't pu'er tea. Someone had to figure out how to make these different kinds of tea at some point. And so innovation it remains and has always been a very important part of tea culture. And especially now, we're having a real renaissance of tea culture in China, where throughout the 20th century, tea culture was somewhat suppressed. You have the fall of imperial China, the end of the luxury class of China with the onset of communist China, and the suppression of the growth and production of tea throughout China for decades and decades at a time. But the skills are still there, and people now have the leisure and the money. There is a rising middle class in China, and people have the money to buy and explore with very precious, expensive tea leaves, to explore different ways of making these teas and different ways of processing them, and not industrial processes. I'm talking developing new hand processes or using types of tea that are genetically distinct from the types of tea that we usually think of, but are still considered tea by the people who grow them and drink them. And so we're going to talk about a couple of those today. And unorthodox, again, is not a category. It doesn't mean anything except that this tea, for one reason or another, does not fit into any of the established categories that we've talked about so far. And there can be a lot of reasons for this. We're going to start with a type of tea that fits into this unorthodox category, not because of anything special in the way it's processed, but mostly because of the type of tea that's used. We have Camellia sinensis, is the classic cultivated tea plant everyone knows. Then there's the pu'er plants, the Gong plants, which get called Assamica. I don't really think that's a good classification for them, because I don't think they're the same as the Assam plants, the Assam wild plants. But suffice it to say, and there was an alternative classification proposed by a Japanese botanist, which was Yunnanensis, which I like a lot better for the pu'er tea plants, but that's not important. Politics aside, what we have in Yunnan is relatives of these ancestral tea plants. However you want to classify these Gong big leaf tea plants, they're from there. They grew up there, they emerged there, they evolved there, and they have very close relatives that, are they the same species? Are they a different species? It's really hard to say, because a lot of times they can hybridize. But suffice it to say, there are many different plants, or at least a handful of different plants in Yunnan specifically, that all get considered tea, but are not Camellia sinensis or not Camellia assamica, or whatever the pu'er plants are. They're distinct. And so some of these have been classified taxonomically. Taliensis, Camellia taliensis, is a well-known one. You sometimes see people using that to make moonlight white. And then we have a version of the tea plant that gets called wild tea that is Camellia crassicolumna. And I love this plant. It's very interesting. It grows in the mountains. It grows in Yunnan, and they call it wild tea. They call it Sheng chA. And you make a couple different kinds of tea out of it, or you can. You can pick the buds, just like we do with regular old tea, pick the new growth. But the trick is the new growth comes out in the middle of winter instead of in the spring. It comes out, and Mancho's letting us use this awesome giant shisha pot, this mutton fat jade shisha pot. So super excited about that. Thank you, Mancho. But Camellia crassicolumna does not emerge in the spring the way that normal tea does. It emerges in the winter, right in the middle of winter, like in December. And Eric, who's behind the camera right now, he and I were actually in Yunnan during one of these winter harvest times. We were there for the opening of the Sanbao studio in Xishuangbana, and we also went up, of course, to Nanhua Mountain. And we went and we harvested yabao, and we went through the forest, and they look like tea plants. They just look like big, kind of scraggly, tall tea plants. But you can tell that they're not because they're coming into bud at a completely different time, and their buds look totally different. And then the new growth that comes off those buds also looks different. So when they're in bud, or when the regular tea plants are in bud, you can easily tell the difference because the timing is not the same and the way they look is not the same. As you can see, they look kind of like, let me find a good one. They look kind of like little bamboo shoots. Look like little bamboo shoots. And what happens when these open up is that instead of getting one bud making one leaf like we do with normal tea, with normal Camellia sinensis or even the pu'er plants, we get each of these little buds opens up into a spray of little flowers or little new leaves. And a lot of the time these new leaves are red or very light in color or very dark in color, but they're usually a different color than the fully mature leaves. And so for most of the year, these plants look more or less like just a feral, scraggly tea plant that just happens to be living in some random spot. But then in the winter, you can tell because they produce these yabao buds, and those then in the early spring turn into these sprays of colorful leaves. And those leaves, when you do pick them, they call those Nian ye Sheng chA. Well, Nian ye Sheng means 1,000-year wild tea. They also you could just call them ye Sheng chA, wild tea. And this is what it looks like when they open up. You see you get these big, big, big leaves. And these would be red when they first come out, and then when they're processed, you still see there's a little red one here. Really, they're all different colors is what they are. And when they're dried, they're all different colors. Some of them are green, some of them are red, some of them look white when they're dried. And so these crassicolumna plants are considered by the people who live in Yunnan to be one of the relatives of tea. They're wild relatives of tea and sometimes considered a wild ancestor of the modern tea plant. We don't know. We have not, I don't believe that we've done the molecular biology work to know for certain what the inheritance and relationship is between this crassicolumna and the cultivated tea plants or even the big pu'er plants that you see. Suffice it to say, the people there like drinking them. They like harvesting them, they like drinking them, and they're actually very prized because unlike cultivated tea, which can be grown in rows and you can just go along and pick them, these are just out in the woods. You gotta go out into the woods and you gotta know where these plants are, and you go from one to the other, and they're not in rows, they're not even in clusters necessarily. They're in like little mini groves because they are living with each other because they've been growing seeds and dropping seeds for a while. But the trick is, they only come out in the winter. You gotta know when to go get them. And even if you pick them right at the perfect ripeness, even if you pick the buds right at the perfect time, if it was a cultivated tea plant or a pu'er tea, even just like a regular pu'er tea plant that's growing in the Yunnan area, those plants will re-bud a couple days later in the growing season. If it's the right conditions in the growing season, you pick the bud, and a couple days later a bud re-emerges, and you can come pick it again. And you can do that a couple times, and that's when we talk about flushes, that's what we're talking about. The crassicolumna plants do it one time. They only make emerge the one little bud each time. And so the tree will be covered with buds for a couple days, then they'll open up and they'll become these open ye Sheng chA leaves, this Nian ye Sheng chA leaves that we have here. And then you're done for the year. That's all you get. You cannot continuously harvest from those plants the same way that you can with the cultivated tea plants. Other interesting thing about this ye Sheng chA, and it's very prized by farmers, but it wasn't widely available until recently. I'm going to make the yabao. I wanted to show you what these big open leaves look like, so you can see what the open yabao is like. You can see it very fuzzy. Those yabao are very fuzzy as well. But we're going to make the buds, because this is kind of the classic form that you usually see is the yabao, little bamboo shoot looking buds. Because they're hard to get, they are highly prized and weren't until pretty recently a big part of the pu'er market. People weren't seeking these out. It was kind of a specialty of the mountain. If you happen to go to a mountain where you have these plants living, then you could drink this tea. Now it's widely disseminated, and people like yabao, and it's worth people's time to go harvest it. Before, again, talking about the 20th century, before this age of the Chinese middle class and the people having the ability to buy luxury goods en masse, like wild tea, you couldn't pay the farmers the amount of money it would cost for them to spend their time going and getting this very niche product instead of focusing on making a higher yield of regular pu'er. And so even though this has always existed, and farmers have always enjoyed it on a small scale, it was not commercially viable because there was just no one to pay for it. And this is a theme that we see throughout the emergence of a more prosperous China in the end of the 20th and beginning of the 21st century, is that we see there was a lot of talent in China with respect to making pottery. There always has been. There's also been a lot of talented tea farmers and tea masters, but they were not at a place where they could ply their craft to the extreme of skill that they would like to, because they weren't going to be compensated for it because the market wasn't ready. But now, and this ties into our larger discussion about tea innovation, yabao is not an innovation, but its presence in the market at large is novel because of this rising Chinese middle class. It's really hard to describe yabao. It smells really good. It smells kind of like a white tea. It is essentially a white tea. This yabao is not cooked, although we do have a cooked yabao that's been processed kind of like a Sheng pu'er. Because it's all buds, it's going to be totally different. But it's very soft, it's very sweet, it's got a very floaty vibe to it and feeling. And I'm not going to fill this whole giant teapot, I'm just going to fill it part way. Here we go. And that soft, sweet, downy character turns into like a more woody, dry minerality in the open leaves. When you get the open leaves, you get some kind of vegetal notes and you get a little bit of astringency, and it's really nice. It starts to remind you of Sheng pu'er, even if it's processed as a white tea, which this one is also. So we have two raw versions of this crassicolumna plant, yabao here in the pot steeping, and then yesheng cha, the whole leaves there dry. And this tea does not have caffeine. They discovered recently in 2009, it was Liu et al., 2009, which was published in the Agricultural and Food Sciences Journal, I think, yeah, something like that. It was Liu et al., 2009, and if you look up crassicolumna, Liu et al., 2009, it'll come up on Google Scholar. And they used high-performance liquid chromatography to analyze the compounds in crassicolumna and compare them to other tea plants, and they found that caffeine and its tea analog theophylline were both absent in these crassicolumna plants. But they did identify the presence and high concentrations of 4 different flavin 3-ols. And I suspect that at least one of definitely one of these flavin 3-ols was EGCG, which we've talked about before, I think, at some point for sure. But for those of you who are new to this concept, EGCG stands for epigallocatechin 3 gallate, and it is one of the main compounds in green tea that when we talk about the cognitive benefits, some of the metabolic benefits, the anti-carcinogenic benefits, the anti-heart disease, the anti-atherosclerotic benefits of green tea, this is what we are essentially talking about. What the most robust research has been done is this EGCG. And also it's one of the psychoactive compounds in tea that it has an anxiolytic effect because of its interaction with the GABA receptors. And so it produces a calming effect the way that a GABAergic process would in the body. And so it has that chill out vibe. So when we think about this tea, it lacks caffeine, it lacks theophylline, it lacks those two stimulating chemicals in tea, but it does have one of these components in tea that is present in all teas, especially green tea, but is very good for different aspects of health, and also has that anxiolytic, anti-anxiety calming effect. Yabao. Yabao is a lot of people's favorite tea. It's a classic. It goes forever. You can steep it a bajillion times, and it never gets bitter, and it's really soft and sweet, and the way it feels, it's so clear. It's very, very light in taste and very clear in taste. You can make it strong, but that's not really what it's about. It's really just about this and I can see it, when I feel the feeling of yabao, is that it's this kind of uplifting but very calm, relaxing, like sinking back into a cloud, but the cloud's floating up. And it's like a really squishy cloud. You're just sinking back into it, relaxing. But the cloud is also floating up at the same time. Yabao and yesheng cha lack caffeine. and lack theophylline. That said, I would not say that they are not stimulating at all. So if someone is sensitive to caffeine, then this is a great tea to give them. If someone, but I would not guarantee them that it's not going to keep them awake, or it doesn't keep me awake, but no teas really keep me awake, so. I'll put another one in here. This water's a little cold. I'll put another one in here for the purpose of getting these a little more rehydrated, because we're gonna look at the rehydrated bud, so you can see what they look like. They're really, really beautiful and interesting looking, and you can tell at a glance that they are not the same as the standard tea plant or the standard tea bud. That's very nice. Put one more in here, and then I'll let this steep for a second. Notice how long I'm letting it steep. Well, I don't have a ton of tea in this giant teapot is one thing. Second thing also is, like I said, this tea doesn't get better. This yesheng, this wild white, is what we call this white yesheng cha, also doesn't get bitter. So that's our first unorthodox tea. It's not new, but it's new to the market. It is unorthodox because we can't properly just say it's white tea. That's not telling the whole story. It's white tea, but it's made out of something so different than what other white teas are made out of that it really deserves to be considered in its own capacity. That said, on our website, it's white tea because we only want to make so many freaking, headers or, categories for navigating the website, but we explain it in depth on the website when we're describing it. Yabao, caveat, yabao can be produced by regular tea plants, or at least pu'er tea plants. I am told when it gets cold, they will grow yabao off of their buds, or off of their trunk. And that's just an expression of probably some inherited yabao genes are getting expressed under certain conditions. Also, I'm told that there are other types of tea plants or relatives, other camellias, relatives of the domestic tea plant that do produce yabao as their buds. I don't know about those. I just know about crassicolumna from Nannuo Mountain, and I'm a big fan. I'm gonna do one more of these guys here. I will drink and pour at the same time. And still quite clear. It always stays pretty clear. It's got a very sweet, syrupy texture to it. And lots of little fuzzies floating in it, the yabao. Yabao just means bud. Ya means bud, bao means bud. They're just two different words for bud. You put it together, it means bud. That's how Chinese works. They say yesheng yabao, wild buds. And if we're going to analogize, thinking about these as white tea, which they technically kind of are, yabao would be like silver needle, danya, all buds. And then this yesheng cha, because it's pretty much all open leaves, would be like a shomei grade. And then if you were to have something partway through the, harvested just a little after the yabao, but before it's all open, then you could think of that as like a baimudan grade. But I haven't seen a whole ton of that. They usually just separate them. Alrighty. Ooh, I got a good one here. Got a good one. Look, it's got some purple on it, and it's a little spiky boy, and it's all plumped up. And isn't that interesting? Does not look like a tea bud, per se. It's a whole own crazy thing. I'm just gonna let these guys steep, get nice and plumped up, set this to the side. So there's lots of other types of unorthodox teas. Not all of them come from different plants. Some of them come from just regular old plants, but they do them weird. They do weird stuff with them. And stuff that you don't see done in places, and stuff that defies the categories that we like to put on things. An example of this, oh wait, hold on. Yeah, I'll go ahead and, no, actually I'm gonna do panlong first. I'm gonna segue. So we've got weird plants, right? Yabao, yesheng cha, those are kind of some weird plants. But what about some weird plants that aren't a different species? They're just weird examples of a regular old tea plant. How about that? Enter the Coiling Dragon, panlong. This is a crazy tea. This is from the Phoenix Mountains, but it's not a dancong cha. And it is not even an oolong per se, it's its own crazy thing. And the story of this tea and why it's called panlong cha is because Lin Yaobin, crazy old Lin Yaobin of Cha'an, discovered a tea plant, a wild tea plant that nobody planted, growing in the forest, on the mountain, in the mountains, in the Phoenix Mountains, and it was coiled around another tree, kind of like a vine, but not like a vine, just like thick and woody, but coiled around another tree. And he harvested tea from this for, a year, and he produced, a couple kilograms of this tea. And he just let it be white tea. He just dried it and let it dry out and let it be white tea. This is in 2013. And he called it panlong. And when I first tried this, I was like, you sure this is tea? This tastes like something else. Because it's so crazy. It tastes like a whole other thing. And he's like, no, I promise you it's tea. I assure you it's tea. And I was like, really? And I went home and I made some. And I took the rehydrated leaves and I looked up all the diagnostic factors that we can apply to a leaf to determine whether it is a Camellia sinensis or fellow traveler plant. And it did. It had the right amount of pairs of serrations. The serrations were visible, but they were very, very light. The leaf was a little bit thinner than a regular tea leaf, a little bit rounder than a regular tea leaf, but it had all of the diagnostic features were there, but in a highly altered form. And so, and I've talked to other people about this, and other people have heard of panlong, but it's not always the same tea because it's not just this one tree. Apparently, this is just something that happens sometimes. And when you see a tea tree that does this and you make tea from it, then it's called panlong, and they might not have anything to do with each other. But I've only heard about it in the Phoenix Mountains. I've never heard about it anywhere else. But I've heard about it from more than one person, 2 people at this point. 2 people who don't know each other. So, but only one of them had it, and that's Lin Yaobin, and here it is. And it's from 2013, and unfortunately, he cannot get more of this because he doesn't know where the tree is. The tree is gone. Well, it's not gone. It's probably still where it was, but he doesn't know where that is because he didn't geotag it, and when he just found it when he was wandering around, and he was going back and forth to it, for a season, and then the next time he went, a year later or 2 years later or whatever to go check it out and see if it was still there doing stuff, he couldn't find it because everything had grown in, and it was a different year, and he couldn't find his way back to this plant. So we only have a little bit of it, and he only has a little bit of it. No one else really buys it. I'm really into it. He served it to us just as a novelty because he's like, I made this crazy thing. This is right after, he made this just 2 years before I met him. So this was still a fun experiment for him at that time, but he just has this one batch. Nobody else buys it. We really love it. Made my friend see ghosts. I often say about this tea, if you're the kind of person who sees ghosts, this tea might make you see ghosts. It's not a promise. That's just a disclaimer. Take that as you will. I don't see ghosts, so it doesn't do that to me, but it does make me feel funny. It's got a strong, weird vibe, and it tastes weird. It tastes very, well, make some here. Ooh. We're gonna get turnt on this. We're doing yabao and panlong. Some funky teas. I was gonna do, I guess I'll do that in the teapot. I'll do this in the gaiwan. But yeah, it's very, very unusual. It's an extremely unusual tea, and it's too weird to be called. It's definitely not an oolong, although it is from the Phoenix Mountains, and it is presumably related to those Phoenix Mountain plants that do make oolongs. It's processed like a white tea, but it's not really like a white tea. It doesn't taste like a white tea. And that's a combination of the fact of really that's, you can chalk that up to, it's this unusual plant. This plant has apparently other divergent chemical properties to go along with its divergent morphology, where it's coiling around another tree, which is not how tea plants normally grow, but plants are very plastic. You see poison oak, and it can look like a little bush, or it can look like a vine, and it can do all kinds of different things. Tea, to a degree, can be the same way, especially when you have these wild tea plants that are reproducing on their own in the mountains, and they're drifting genetically very far from the cultivated plants that they're descended from. So it's not an oolong, it's kind of a white tea, but really it's gonna be its own unorthodox thing. I'm excited about this one. I haven't had this one in a minute, and I really, really love this one. I've never had a problem with panlong. Some people Some people have a complex relationship with this tea. I don't. It's very simple. I just like this tea a lot. Let's see, let me grab this guy. And it all starts getting weird now. All right, let's talk about the weirdness of this tea. Well, it smells sweet like dried plums, Chinese dried plums, like Chinese medicinal dried stuff, but not bitter like Chinese medicine. It sounds like some sweet Chinese medicines because some of them are sweet. It's very spicy, it's very sweet. It's got an oily taste. It doesn't smell oily, but it's very unusual. It smells like some old school Chinese ass stuff is what it really smells like. And I don't know how else to put it. If you've ever seen John Carpenter's Big Trouble in Little China, it's got that vibe to it. I don't know how else to put that. I loved that movie when I was a kid. That was one of my favorite movies. And I'm gonna just drink this rinse, I think. Well, no, I'm gonna taste the rinse, but I want it full strength. This water's a little cool right now. It's just so loud when we boil the water. It just makes it completely untenable. And it's like, you're watching it, you're listening to it, you're not drinking it. But I gotta be honest, when the water's too cold, sometimes it's just a little too cold. But it's still really good. The taste is sweet. The taste is very hard to describe. It definitely has some like that licoricey sweetness to it. It has a little bit of that oily coating your mouth quality to it. The feeling is it starts off almost like this kind of rushing sensation in my chest, and then that kind of expands throughout my body. Anyways, it's a very unusual tea, and we class it as unorthodox because not only is its story and its origin a little bit weird, but just the way it tastes, the way it smells, and the way it makes you feel is very distinctive. There we go. That's the color that tea is supposed to be. And it's fuzzy. It's fuzzy. This is also an aged tea. You know, this is a 8-year-old tea at this point. And it's just one of these little rare gems. And if you're just going around asking about types of tea, you know, I could have been like, this is too weird. This isn't an oolong. You're a Phoenix Mountain tea master. You're supposed to give me oolong. That's what I'm here for. But it's really good. I love it. Lots of people love it. And yes, very, very good. And you have to open your mind when you're in China because tea doesn't care about your rules. And tea masters also really don't care about the rules either. They're always doing kind of weird stuff, especially the ones that I work with. And that's just innovation. That's just making new stuff. Although again, panlong has some kind of existence beyond just Lin Ya Bin. I've heard of people refer to it, and there's some kind of tradition associated with it that extends beyond just the one person. There's also teas or tea-like products that are made from other parts of the plant, like tea flowers. I don't know if I've ever done a thing with tea flowers, but we got some tea flowers. We got little bings of tea flowers. That's the flower of the tea plant. The tea plant is a camellia. Most people know camellias from their gardens. They're an ornamental genus, and they grow lots of beautiful flowers of different colors. And tea plants can have red, like orangey red flowers. They can have white flowers, and you can harvest them and you can drink them, but they don't last very long. You have to dry them just right. Really, the best way that Li Shulin has found to do it, I only get tea flowers from one person, which is Li Shulin, because those pu'er flowers are big enough that you can do, and bountiful enough, abundant enough, that you can do this with them. But they'll take the tea flowers and they'll steam them and they'll press them into a mini bing, and then you have to get them to dry all the way out. And it's really difficult because they're not tea leaves and they don't behave like tea leaves. You have to get them to dry all the way through. And if you don't, they will get eaten by bugs. And like half the time they get eaten by bugs, in my experience. It's like half the time I want to get tea flower mini bings, I can't get them because he's like, they got eaten by bugs. But sometimes they don't. And when they don't, then you can keep them and you can age them, kind of like pu'er. I don't know if they get much better with age because I don't have any very old ones. We usually just drink them and sell them. But they are really good. They're really hard to describe what they're like. There's a leathery quality, there's a dried fruit quality, they don't taste like pu'er in the classic sense, but they have a little bit of that earthiness starting when they've been pressed like that and aged a little bit. And we also will make an infusion out of the seeds of tea, all the way on the other side of China in Fujian. These are from Fujian. We know Fuding from white tea. That is one of the origin points. It's pretty much the origin point of white tea, that area. And these are the seeds of the white tea plants. And they're little. Pu'er seeds are big. They're big old nuggets. But these are little duders. And they're small, and you boil them. The infusion that you get from boiling them is really lovely. It's this dark, brown, rich, kind of almost effervescent infusion. It has like an oily quality to it. It's very thick. It's got some woody, tannic-y notes to it, although it's not extremely drying or tannic. It's very smooth, and it has kind of like an acorny thing. I don't know exactly how else to put it. Maybe I'm just saying that because they look like little acorns, but it definitely has a nutty quality to it. One day, maybe I will demonstrate on this show or some other show making these, preparing these, but you really need to boil them. I need to get a good boiling setup where you can see it, or there's a glass kettle where you're boiling it in this glass kettle so you can see it happening, because they can be steeped. You can steep them. You can buy these and you can put them in a gaiwan and you can steep them and they'll be good. You'll get a good 7, 8, 9 infusions out of them and they'll taste really nice, but you'll never get that last little bit of juice out, and that last little bit of juice is very substantial unless you boil them. So we'll do it one day. Love tea seeds, very, very interesting thing that I've only seen in Fuding. Now, because of the magic of Hollywood, we have hot water, and I'm going to use it, freshly boiled hot water, to make a real grown-up infusion of panlong here. It's after hours. We can have the strong panlong. You know what I realize? I think that I might have compared this to Big Trouble in Little China is because that word panlong just has this very like classic, like old school Chinesey feel. It means Coiling Dragon. And it just sounds like something you'd have. Lo Pan, that's why I'm thinking of it. There was a character named Lo Pan in Big Trouble in Little China, and I think panlong from that. So there you go, we got to the bottom of it. Funny how the human mind works. So I'm gonna do one more infusion of this one. Oh boy. That's nice. Look at it glow. And Lo Pan was a ghost. So, you know, there's all kinds of associations going on there. All right, excellent. Ooh, boy. I do love me some good panlong. So we've talked about teas that are unorthodox because they are from unorthodox plants, either wild plants that are not caffeinated and have other weird stuff going on, or freaky regular plants that just grew in a freaky way and are weird, like this one, panlong. And then we have teas that are processed in an unconventional way that really puts them in that unorthodox category. Examples of this would be, for example, like Master's Green, which is Gufa, which we get from Ray, from Grass People Tree. And her master, Master Lin, takes this Guizhou tea and he processes it by leaving it sitting on, it picks it and then leaves it sitting on a mat, just chilling, not cha-chinged or anything, for weeks at a time. Completely not the way that I think of making green tea, but he makes it, he says it's green tea, and I believe him, because he's the master, even though it's not the way that we think of making green tea. And the result is that it tastes a lot like oolong. It's got these really strong, distinctive floral fragrances emerging from it, just like oolong. It has a mellow taste like oolong, but it obviously is not oolong. It hasn't been roasted with charcoal. It hasn't gone through a yao ching or a peng ching or any of these other things that you do with oolong. It's not from oolong breeds. It's not from necessarily a single cultivar the way oolongs are. It's not from oolong country. So you can't really properly call it an oolong, and he doesn't. He calls it green tea. And just because it doesn't fit the bill of what little old me thinks a green tea is being doesn't mean it's not green tea. So we call it green tea, but to my mind, when I drink it, when I think about it, it's kind of an unorthodox tea. It's a novel way of making tea. And he says this is the ancient technique. That's what gu fa means, is the ancient technique of the people who lived there in Guizhou. They would make the tea in this way by letting it just chill, wither, dry out, be rehydrated outside for weeks at a time, and then be processed, then cha'd and processed into tea. So he says that is a traditional technique that they do there, gu fa, meaning ancient technique. And why? Because Guizhou, they've been making tea in relative isolation from the rest of the Chinese tea world for, I guess, centuries. Because Guizhou, as I've talked about in other episodes, Guizhou is a remote province that's smack in the middle of southwestern China. And so what makes it remote is that it's got a ton of mountains, and it was industrially and commercially and infrastructurally underdeveloped until very recently. And that means it's got a very clean, beautiful environment. And because it's surrounded by Sichuan and Yunnan and Hunan and Guangxi, it's just an island in the middle of these big tea producing provinces. If you're going to get tea from southwestern China, you're not going to get it from Guizhou because you're going to hit some other tea first. You're going to be getting pu'er, or you're going to be getting anhua chA, or you're going to be getting some Sichuanese tea, or liubao, or some Guangxi tea. You're not going to be getting or importing from Guizhou because you've got to get through other tea producing regions to get to it. And because of that, because of this isolation, Guizhou tends to produce these really novel and unusual teas because they haven't been keeping step necessarily with what everybody else all over China is doing. They've just been doing their own thing out there on their own in Guizhou. And the results are really remarkable. And another example of this is guan cha, which is made from chA, the purple. It turns, purple for part of the year. In the late spring, early summer, it's this purple color changing cultivar. It's not even a cultivar, it's a landrace. It's just a local breed of tea that is not cloned. It's just seed propagated plants, and the plants that live in this area, it's kind of like a subspecies. They have their own distinctive characteristics because of genetic drift and selection and whatever else. And so they take these chA plants, and they're small leaf plants, they're not big leaf plants, but some of them are very old. And I used to think only Yunnan has really, really old, tea plants, or I guess you got some in the Phoenix Mountains, but they have these old plants, they turn purple in the late spring and early summer. They harvest tea from these chA plants and they process it very simply by doing a low temperature cha'ing, and then they dry it out in the sun just like Sheng pu'er, and then they stick it in a ceramic jar. Guan means jar. And so they stick it in this ceramic jar and they hang it from the rafters of the kitchen and they age it for 20 years and then they boil it and they drink it. What is it? Well, it starts off as green tea, then it's chA, turns into chA. It's not unheard of. People do it in other places. Guizhou cha is like that. But that is bordering on orthodox. That is, because there's precedent for that in other places. Green tea, something starting off as being kind of a folk green tea and then aging into chA. Pu'er is an example of this. Aged pu'er is essentially that. It starts off as a green tea, Sheng pu'er, fresh Sheng, and then it ages into essentially a chA as it ferments. So you get that in Guangxi with Guizhou cha, you get it in Yunnan with pu'er, and you get it in Guizhou with guan cha, made out of this chA landrace. Other really unusual things they do in Guizhou, besides guan cha, which is technically green than chA, and besides Master's Green, which sure, it's green. He says it's green, I'll call it green. You get this beauty right here. This was something I was so excited to discover in Guizhou that Ray, again, introduced me to. It's from Duyuan, not the same place that the chA and guan cha come from, not the same place, that would be Qian, and then not from the same place that Master's Green or Bird King or Laogongxiang or any of Master Lin's teas come from, which is the Panying Mountains. This is from further south in Duyuan. Duyuan is one of the few places in Guizhou that is starting to come into its own with respect to fame in the tea world. Guizhou teas are not by and large famous for the reason I mentioned before, but Duyuan Maojian is starting to become very popular because Duyuan they're receiving a lot of funding and attention from the provincial government because it's a very clean environment, it's a very unspoiled environment, and they started off on a good foot by banning the use of pesticides and herbicides in this region right off the bat when they started really firing up the tea industry there. And they're producing this vernacular green from local Duyuan plants called Duyuan Maojian, and it's starting to get a reputation. And I like it, it's great. This is what I really go to Duyuan for. This and lychee gummy, because lychee gummy, which we covered in the yellow tea episode, is also an unusual novel tea from Duyuan. And this one is aged in a cave. And now I've heard of other cave-aged white teas, and that's cool. I'm stoked about that. I've heard of cave-aged Baimudans and stuff like that. That's great. Remember, white tea is just dried. So if you dry it in the sun, you're gonna get one effect. If you dry it in the shade, you get another effect. And if you dry it in the cave, then you're gonna get a completely other effect. So why is this unorthodox? Why is this not just cave-aged white tea? Because they massage it. They give it a very light massaging, a very light ronian before they age it in the cave. It takes about 2 days. What would usually take an afternoon into the evening for the tea to dry in the sun takes 2 days for it to dry all the way in a cave. And they give it this massaging process first, which is gonna oxidize it just a little bit. And that's not really how you make white tea. You're really just supposed to dry out white tea. And they call it white tea, so we call it white tea, but it breaks the rules, and so it's unorthodox, and that's why it's in the show. I love this tea. This is one of the most hazelnutty teas that I've ever had. It's got like hecka Nutella vibes, Ferrero Rocher, you know what I'm talking about. And it's a really lovely note. You don't get it in a ton of teas. It's a very distinctive taste, and this, I've never had it stronger than I get it in this Hongdao. Hongdao is a really cool name too. It means unfolding path. Dao, like Taoism, the way, the path. And then Hong is this beautiful Chinese word that's really impossible to translate, and it has all of these implications of spaciousness, expansion and unfolding and unraveling, and just like, I imagine a path just expanding out in front of you, and that's kind of how it feels. And again, this is a novelty tea. They were not doing this until recently, but some clever farmer in Duyuan, and my contact through there, her name's Chloe. She uses her English name. She studied in England, so she goes by her English name, and she is the one who works with these farmers and gets this. But the farmers she works with, they develop this technique for doing this. They don't necessarily do it every year, and they like it aged. I had a really nice 2017 batch from them. That was the first batch that I ever had, and when I first had it, it was fresh, but as it aged, it got a lot of really interesting characteristics to it. This is 2020. This is the most recent batch of that Hongdao cave-aged white-ish tea. White with an asterisk. Oh, I'm gonna have to do some maneuvering here. It's a very wide chA. It's a very wide teapot, but not as wide as the chA. This is the ASMR portion of the show. There we go. I don't know why that worked out the way it did. It's a little bit of decoration there. All right, Hongdao, my love. I'm gonna do this little Jinrun Pao for this guy. I'm not gonna do a full rinse, because that's not how they do it in Guizhou. They say you don't rinse Guizhou tea, you do this little trick with it. So I'm gonna do that little trick, that little Jinrun Pao trick. And I'm gonna give you some smelling notes on these wet leaves. There's people who do this much more gracefully than I, but. Yeah, I'm getting toasted, like a roasted toasted hazelnut. I'm getting some cacao-y notes. Sorry, Yao, there's some cacao notes in it, that's real. Yaya hates it when we say that something smells, tea smells like chocolate, but sometimes tea smells like chocolate, you know? But this one smells like cacao. You got cacao notes, you got hazelnut, again, Ferrero Rocher, Nutella. And then like a savory, almost like toasted soybean or like toasted nori, very savory umami smell to it. And as white teas go, it's like almost like a Baimudan grade, but very, very little leaves, very little buds, very little leaves. But it's got a lot of buds. It's not the fully leafy chA grade picking that we see with like this wild white here. And that massaging process, that ronian process, gives it just a little bit of a different vibe than normal white teas. It makes it more sweet, and it makes it very toasty and roasty, and gives it some of those warm toasty smells like you get from the oxidized teas, like red teas, for example. And we're back with cave-aged white tea. We had a light go out while I was pouring the tea for unknown reasons. The light bulb's fine. The outlet was working before. It just stopped working. And you didn't see this because we've edited it out. But earlier, right after I poured the panlong and was talking about the tea seeds, another light just randomly fell to the ground for no good reason. So I'm just gonna chalk that up to the supernatural poltergeisty qualities of panlong, that we're having some really poltergeisty stuff happen during this filming, but we keep it real for y'all, and this is how we do. So, Hongdao cave-aged white tea, very beautiful, very, very fragrant and exquisitely fragrant tea. Not like any other white tea I've ever had, but like other white teas, it is good aged. And if I was going to analogize, then I would say it's closest to like a Bai Mudan grade, because it's got little bitty buds, it's got little bitty leaves. It doesn't have the big juicy buds like the white tea plants in Fuding have, but it does have a lot of them, and they are fuzzy and lovely and nice. Here, I'll do Yayao's makeup trick. And you get these nice fuzzy little buds in there, pretty much 1-to-1 with the leaves. So it's like an iya grade. And because of that, I'll look at what you see the leaves here. I don't know if that's a good angle, you can see the leaves, but you can see they're brown. They've got that oxidation on there. And so it's almost a little bit like an aged white, even though this is from 2020, they've almost got some of that aged quality about them because they've gotten that massaging process, and then they've been withered very slowly in a cave over a longer time span, giving them more time to oxidize in their wet state before they dry out all the way. Because that cave is dry, but it's cool, and they're not in the sunlight, and they're not getting that heat and the light from the sun to dry them out. And so you get a slower withering process, and you get longer time with the leaves having moisture, and plus that light massaging process gives it that extra level of oxidation, and it brings in some of that warmth. And in addition to a little bit of getting some of like the honey notes that you get from aged white tea that we're familiar with, I also get some toasty, toasted soybean, toasty, roasty notes that I would associate with something like red tea. Oh yeah. Yep, definitely have that satisfying back of the throat red tea mouthfeel. And then there's some maltiness, and then there's that hazelnut, just a ripple of hazelnut right at the top, right at the roof of the mouth, and also that maltiness. The hazelnut kind of ends in this squishy, malty character. Oh yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. This is by no means a comprehensive list of all the unorthodox teas in China, because again, unorthodox is not a category. Unorthodox is the absence of category. It's like the color black. Black's not really a color. Black is the absence of color. In the same way, unorthodox teas are just teas that fall outside of these categories that we have spent the last 3 years describing to you in exhaustive detail, and now I'm here to tell you, throw it all out the window, because people can do whatever they want with tea. And you got all kinds of weird teas out there that I've never even heard of. Probably hundreds of them, I don't know, at least lots of them. And they might all be considered unorthodox. None of those might fall very neatly into one of these little categories that we like to put on them. And I want to close with this thought. Tea is a living art. Tea is constantly being innovated upon. And the evolving and emerging tea market is allowing for people to be more experimental, using different kinds of tea plants, using different parts of the tea plant, and processing the tea in novel ways that defies the categorizations that we've talked about. And I think that what we should remember is that people make tea the way they make tea. And sometimes they are informed by a long-standing tradition and a lineage, and sometimes they're not. But the categories of tea that we have spent these past 3 years in this whole second season talking about, we should think of them as descriptive and not prescriptive. And really, people make tea the way they make tea, and the way that they were taught to make tea or the way that they developed. And sometimes they've been making tea in these unorthodox ways for hundreds of years. And when people go and they take these categories, they went through it, and tea scholars went through and they analyzed all the different teas, all these different expressions of tea in China. Some of them had names and were specified as a category before. Some of them were more loosely defined. But taking these categories, red, yellow, green, white, etc., a lot of these are really the efforts of scholars and tea enthusiasts after the fact to go and take this abundance of expression of tea culture and tea art and tea processing styles and categorize them for their own digestion, for their own purposes of understanding them and for their own purposes of describing them in the market. But tea and tea farmers and tea masters will express themselves in whatever way that they want. And we love it. We think it's great. I love finding a new unorthodox tea, something that changes and expands my entire concept of what can be done with tea. So I hope to find many more of these over the course of our time sourcing tea over the years, and I will definitely tell you all about them when we do. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Gong Fu Tea Cha, our very haunted, spooky episode of Gong Fu Tea Cha with our unorthodox teas. Y'all have a great night, and we'll see you soon.